Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Behnam, thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be with you, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
Of course, a helicopter crash killed the Iranian president, foreign minister, and other officials over the weekend. As we sit here a few days later in the wake of their deaths, what's the sentiment in Iran right now?
Well, it's a great question because what the regime is trying to show is one thing, but what you've seen within minutes, if not hours, of the news being reported, first indirectly and then on social media, and then finally after several hours being officially confirmed, and then it being officially confirmed that the president, the foreign minister, and several other individuals were involved last Sunday in a helicopter crash in northwestern Iran. You've actually seen on social media, and again, even on the street, and even on diaspora-owned media channels where Iranians are sending videos and messages from inside to outside, that there's actually been felicitation and if not a bit of jubilation and celebration. Lest we forget, Ebrahim Raisi is someone who's had his hands stained with the blood of the Iranian population for several decades. He's failed upwards in his career. When he was 29 years old, he was at least a member of a body called the Death Commission that was implementing multiple fatwas to clear Iran's political prisons at the end of the Iran-Iraq War. From that time on, he moved upwards and upwards across the Iranian judiciary. He became the head of a major parastatal charitable institution that actually really was a pro-regime slush fund, became head of the judiciary, and then in 2021 was elected, or shall we say selected, into becoming Iran's next president, where he was expected to serve at least a 4-year term, if not 8. And many people assumed that his name was on the short list to become the next supreme leader or the next most powerful person in Iran. None of this at all has impacted the view or the values of those Iranians who indeed were felicitating his death because, well, quite frankly, they understood that the Iranian president does not control foreign and security policy, and they found him to be reprehensible anyway. And one measure of that is, even long before this entire ordeal, is that the election that got Raisi into office had the lowest ever official recorded turnout in the history of the Islamic Republic for a presidential election. So that tells you a great deal about how the population feels, despite several days of images coming out of Iran of different processionals and funerals.
Raisi had this really grisly reputation, as you mentioned. He was known as the Butcher of Tehran. He also had the legacy of a failure, according to you, according to other conversations I've had. What type of leader is going to take Raisi's place?
Well, within the office of the President of the Islamic Republic, there will be something interesting because while that position, both on paper and in practice, is not particularly powerful, it does have more to do with Iran's domestic politics than foreign and security policy. And more importantly, because Iran's supreme leader is 85, and many people are talking about succession, and there has been lots of assumptions and guesswork and analysis that Raisi might be the next supreme leader. And now that he's passed, the most important implications are for who will be Iran's next president, because they will have elections, again, special elections, within 50 days. And the person who will be elected then, in mid-July, is supposed to serve a 4-year term. And given that Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, is 85, that may coincide with the passing of the supreme leader on that president's watch. So whoever becomes the next president, even though they may likely just be another hardline functionary, could end up playing a pivotal political role along with a whole series of other institutions, perhaps more in a supporting role to a whole series of other institutions, as to who may shape Iran's political future once the supreme leader passes.
What do you think that shaping of Iran's political future looks like? Do you think it could swing, maybe be more moderate, or will it be this hardline stance that Raisi took?
All else being equal, the trend lines really since 2005 is that the supreme leader has felt more and more comfortable orchestrating the contraction of the political space and then shifting it further and further to the hard right, such that, the quote-unquote moderate president Hassan Rouhani of 2013 was prevented from running for the Assembly of Experts, such that Ali Larijani, former head of the parliament, former IRGC individual, longtime regime insider, was not permitted to run for president in 2021. We all know the drama that erupted between former Iranian President Ahmadinejad and the ultra-hardline establishment, and even Supreme Leader Khamenei himself years ago, despite Khamenei and the security forces crushing hundreds of Iranians, thousands of Iranians in protests in 2009 and the Green Movement to literally defend Ahmadinejad. So this is a system that has taken every opportunity to move further and further to that ultra hardline authoritarian and Islamist right. And the trend lines, all else being equal, prove that they'll go in that direction. Now, the kind of people that the Supreme Leader envisions being at the helm the next go round are not assessed to be particularly competent or particularly capable. But the traits I think he's looking for are loyal and zealous. And that, given Iran's newfound kind of hybrid military warfare status, its head position at the axis of resistance, its missile arsenal, its drone arsenal, its robust domestic arms industry, its atomic infrastructure that, in my view, is geared towards a weapon, leads that to be a very, very dangerous situation, and one that means we're heading towards more instability, not less.
Something that's really interesting that you've mentioned a few times now is that Raisi was not a competent or capable leader, and they're not looking for those in the future. I have since October 7th talked to an FDD senior advisor, Richard Goldberg, and he's told me in past conversations that Iran's fingerprints are all over various conflicts in the Middle East through their proxies. What does Raisi's death do to these conflicts?
Well, we know that the Iranian president isn't a key formulative position in the regime's foreign and security policy, despite, for example, the president does indeed sit on the Supreme National Security Council. The president's statement certainly can impact not the substance, but the style behind Iran's foreign policy. But make no mistake, with or without Raisi, things you're seeing in the region, both before October 7 and after October 7, indicate a newfound sense of emboldenment that the regime in Tehran has. And particularly the figures that are emboldened are the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which have really created or co-opted a terror and proxy network across most of the failed states of the Middle East. It's no accident that places like Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, places that Iranian politicians almost a decade ago claimed as being Arab capitals in the hands of Iran, are also failed states and are also home to major proxy organizations either created or co-opted by the Islamic Republic. And really, in the past 10 to 15 years, the regime has moved state-level weapons into the hands of many of these non-state actors, be it drones, rockets, missiles, mortars, or IRAMs. And this is essentially how the regime has not just been able to fire at Americans and get away with it, but also be able to prosecute a larger ring of fire strategy against Israel. And to kind of get a better regional sense of what Iran's regional strategy is for your viewers, some of them may know the first Secretary General of NATO, when his term ended, I believe they asked him, what is NATO all about? And he gave this very clever formulation that I'm probably going to butcher, which is, it's about keeping the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in. And if you had to apply that, foreign policy framework to the IRGC, it's about keeping the IRGC and its proxies in. It's about keeping the moderate Arab states down and about keeping the Americans out. And once you add elements of that equation up together, that allows the regime to engage in this boom and bust cycle of violence against Israel, just like you saw on October 7th.
When you're talking about this more emboldened nature, I am curious what the implications are for the United States.
Unfortunately, it's quite significant. The biggest ballistic missile barrage, and this is just one example, the biggest ballistic missile barrage the U.S. has received in its history since the end of World War II has actually come from Iran. In the response to the killing of Qasem Soleimani, who was Iran's chief terrorist and military mastermind, by former President Donald Trump by a drone strike in Iraq in January 2020, the Iranians actually overtly and directly fired ballistic missiles from their territory, precision strike missiles, I have to say, at 2 U.S. bases in Iraq. Thankfully, no individuals died, but over 140 traumatic brain injuries occurred. And these were at bases with no known air or missile defense assets. This is a big problem that the regime feels so comfortable literally taking on the U.S. Directly. So one of the larger phenomenon we're witnessing in the Middle East is that the success of Iran's regional foreign and security policy is to devalue the option of a limited or a overt conventional conflict with the regime, while the regime is building up newfound capabilities that it's layering on top of its terrorism apparatus that allows it to engage in hybrid and select conventional warfare. And you see this with what the proxies in Iraq and Syria have been able to do, firing multiple times since October 7, at least 170 times at U.S. bases in Iraq, Syria, as well as in Jordan. That even led recently in January to the killing of 3 service persons at Tower 2022 base in Jordan, as well as, of course, what they're doing to U.S. partners and allies, getting the Saudis to hedge and move diplomatically closer to them, and trying to put military, political, and economic pressure on Israel with this larger ring of fire strategy. So the Iranians are quite good at using military means to accomplish political ends, whereas I think Israel and America, by contrast, are quite good at using military means to achieve military ends, but have had trouble over the past 2 decades translating a military win into a political win.
During Raisi's funeral, there were death to America chants. There were also death to Israel chants. Where do you see U.S. relations with Iran going after Raisi's death?
The passing of Raisi and the Foreign Minister Abdullahian and those several individuals really was a moment for moral clarity for the U.S. and really was a moment of moral clarity for the Biden administration. And unfortunately, I have to say they failed that mission. When you look at what the State Department said, when you look at what the State Department spokesperson said, when you look at what even the Senate chaplain recently said, wishing the Iranian people well, I understand, people pray for your enemies and pray for your adversaries, but this is a fundamentally different equation. You have very, very, very few instances where the U.S. actually prays for the deceased dictators across a whole host of countries that the U.S. has been at odds with or even at war with from the Cold War period into the present. There's very little empirical evidence of the U.S. doing this for other dictators. Why the U.S. went or felt the need to go out of its way for this, particularly as State Department messaging was actually slightly improving, really from December 2023 to March 2024, you began to see some positive changes in the way the State Department was being at least more willing to stand with the Iranian people in principle. And things like this are just a moral and strategic and political own goal, particularly after the 2022-2023 women life freedom protests in Iran that rocked the country and really spread over 150 different cities, towns, and even villages in that country. And allegedly there was full-throated U.S. support and Western support, but it dissipated quite quickly. And with messages like this, it's not going to look good nor feel good for the Iranian people.
The State Department did release a statement which in part read that the United States expresses its official condolences for the death of the Iranian president. So are you saying you think this is tone deaf? You think the Biden administration was trying to walk a line? What do you make of this?
I think it's also tone deaf, and it's also trying to walk a line because what they say is not entirely divorced from what they do. You've seen the administration try quite hard, and indeed no one can blame the administration for trying to do whatever it could to try to put together a cap or a diplomatic resolution to the Iranian nuclear program, but they failed. And they didn't fail because they didn't try hard enough. They failed because the regime didn't want it. For example, why would the regime be willing to entertain talks to actually cap or even roll back its nuclear program such that it could get sanctions relief to export 2.4 million barrels of oil a day legally, when illegally, but without enforced sanctions, the regime is still able to export, between 1.8 to 2.2 million barrels per day. So the administration didn't fundamentally believe in a theory of pressure. It had a theory of engagement. And with these kinds of theories comes these diplomatic niceties that you mentioned, comes lots of reporting that we've seen since late 2023 into 2024 about indirect bilateral talks in places like Oman, for example, about sanctions waivers. So by effect, the administration has been trying to pump the brakes on any pressure. The problem is, A, the regime in Tehran is pocketing the material and the economic dividends of pumping the brakes, and B, not translating that into a slowdown of its program or an end or rollback of its enmity. And this is, again, that's why I think it's an own goal and a missed opportunity for the administration to both course correct its Iran policy and to really do something you don't really have an opportunity to do in the Middle East, which is to marry your strategies and your values.
As President Raisi was not the most powerful leader in Iran, but when you're looking to the future, what does a post-Raisi Iran look like? And as an expert in Iran and their political activities, what are you specifically looking out for next?
Well, one thing to keep your eyes on, particularly when we get to the special election in mid-June, is again the boycott rate. Because as protests, particularly anti-regime protests that have moved away from reform and towards revolution and wholesale change of the system since 2017 have occurred, and you've seen a spike in that from 2017 to present, you've seen a downturn in the official electoral turnout rate, whether that's for presidential elections or parliamentary elections or any other kind of election inside of that country. Because as we all know, those are tightly managed, they're neither free nor fair, and the regime does indeed have a desired candidate in mind before this entire ordeal happens. So I have no doubt that post-Raisi Iran is going to look a lot like pre-Raisi Iran, or even Iran under Raisi. The real question will be, what will be the impact of this person who is elected after July on post-Khamenei Iran, after the current supreme leader goes, and what will be the relationship of that individual with perhaps the most important institution, politically, militarily, and certainly economically, which is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its affiliated businesses, veterans, and other interests.
Behnam, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate your expertise, and you're welcome back anytime. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. My pleasure. I appreciate that as well.